Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Matthew chapter 17. We're going to slip over into chapter 18 um, because it's going to be a very, very interesting question that is going to keep coming up among the disciples, and that is, who is the greatest? Who would be the greatest among them? And so obviously that question is going to have, to me, very relevance for for us today. Okay, so all right, so excuse me. So let's get into it. And really, truthfully, I'm always amazed. I'm always amazed that when we read simple things like that, I'm always amazed that how we kind of like ignore it today. Like how when you look at biblical standards, how we just ignore it. But you'll see later on. We come in just a moment. Now we're gonna pick it up at verse 22, and I did. If you remember, we studied the sermon, not the sermon, the Transfiguration. Jesus takes, excuse me, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and he goes up to a mountain, and then there he's transfigured. And when he is transfigured, the very essence of Jesus shone through it shined through his clothes, everything. And we got a glimpse, a taste. At least Peter, James, and John did. But another astonishing thing happened is that they saw um, Moses and Elijah, and I won't kind of rehash that because I'm tempted to, because it is such a astounding event that happened. But it also gave us some insights in terms of it gave us some insights about life, um, life. You can say life after death, and we don't get those glimpses in scriptures a lot. We don't get that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something different here. I'm gonna go back to that. The couple of points I want to make before I move on. Let's go back to that. Uh, let's go back to verse 3. Um, so listen to this. It says, "Suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them." I just want you to get that visual there. That here Moses, who have been dead for some 1,500 years, and then Elijah, who had been dead for some 800 years. Okay. And again, what I want to kind of just go over this, because I was going to move on, but this is we don't get these glimpses often too. So that's why I want to go over this. And then you can say this is kind of a special study in that, again, this is just so amazing to me, because again, just in this short sentence, we get a glimpse of what it's going to be like after you die. Okay, what it's going to be like after you die. And here we have Moses, who had been dead for 1,500 years, Elijah 800 years, and notice here they show up. Now, possibly for their perspective, that time frame there is no time frame, right? Just kind of whizzed by. But the point I want you to see here is that just think about how time, I mean, what the reality is, and why even sometimes God, excuse me, God is not as concerned. Let me say this: God is not as concerned about death as we are. And sure, when a loved one dies, we're hurt, we grieve. As I often say, when you think about, here is my two hands joined together, I can let them go. But death is always like right in the middle of the arm, just taking a big chunk out of your life, and it's never gentle. But for the believer, we have hope. For the believer, we have hope. And let me go to Second Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, as one man liked to say. Okay, 2 Corinthians. Now let's read this here. He says, verse 1 says, "For if our body, if our temporary, for we know that if our temporary earthly dwelling is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal dwelling in the heavens, not made with hands." Now, from a Christian's perspective, okay, you have to understand here, this is the hope, the you can say the promise of what's to come for us. Now watch what he says. "Indeed, we groan in this body, desiring to put on our dwelling from heaven, since we are clothed, we will not be found naked. Indeed, we groan while we are in this tent, burdened as we are, because we do not want to be unclothed, but clothed, so that mortality may be swallowed up by life. And the one who has prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave us the Spirit as a down payment." And there's a lot we can unpack with that. I'm just going to make a quick statement here, that when we ask the question, what happens when you believe? When we say you are saved, what happens to you when we believe? What happens? You know, what happens when we believe? Okay. And here's the thing: we are saved. We're not trying to get saved. We're not working on getting saved. But notice what he says here: we are sealed, right? We receive the Holy Spirit, which is also known as being born of the Spirit, being born again, being born of God, thus producing salvation, eternal life, sonship with God. God is our Heavenly Father. And it's not that it is not a figurative language either. This is actually what happened. So then Paul says, indeed, he says, look at verse 5 again. "And the one who prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave us the Spirit as a down payment." So let me go back, because I want you to see this. So what happens to us? He says, if we know that if our temporary, look at verse 1 again, "We know that if our temporary earthly dwelling is destroyed, we have a building from God, eternal in the heavens." So what I want to focus on here is the fact that we have this I'm not focusing on the fact about what is to come. Okay, what is to come, which means our glorified body, and we're going to get a glorified body. Life is good for the believer. The future is good for the believer. Some of us may suffer persecution in this lifetime, but that's the worst it ever gets for all eternity. Now that kind of may be hard for us to grasp here in America. And for us in America, we don't, you know, we don't really suffer persecution. Other than a deranged person may persecute Christians, but if you think about this, I could sue somebody for insulting me. Now, as a Christian, I won't, because my testimony and showing my testimony, living my testimony would be far greater than my, character being insulted. Okay. So he says, um, if for we know that if our temporary earthly dwelling is destroyed, we have a building from God. So who is the we? Think about that. Who is the we? So then he says, indeed, we groan in this body, desiring to put on our dwelling from heaven. We do. We want that glorified body. The bodies that we're in now is cursed. It is dying. It is getting weak, right? So God has promised us a new body that's going to be like that of Jesus. So he says, but I want you to notice the we, which is our spirit and soul, or what Paul may call our inward man. Let me just kind of show you that. Look at verse 16 here, up at verse 16 in chapter 4. Therefore, we do not give up, even though our outer person is being destroyed, our inner person is being renewed day by day. For our momentary light affliction is producing for us an absolutely incomparable eternal weight of glory. So we do not focus on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. For we know, so here's the thought, continue. For we know that if our temporary dwelling, see, so many of these physical bodies here, this physical body, it's temporary. It's dying, it's decaying. So we have a better hope of this new body. But if the we is our inner man, now this inner man is your spirit and soul. Your spirit is what has been given life, born again, born of God. And what I want to show you is that, so watch this. So then he says in verse 4, now let me read it again. For we know that if our earthly dwelling is destroyed, we have a building from God eternal in the heavens. We have it. Think about this. We ain't our bodies, even though our bodies is a part of us. We, meaning the inner man, can be separated from our bodies. Indeed, we groan in this body, desiring to put on the dwelling from heaven, since when we are clothed, we will not be found naked. Indeed, we groan while we are in this tent, meaning this body, burdened as we are, because we do not want to be unclothed, but clothed. In other words, as a part of God's plan, it is not for eternity to be without our bodies or disembodied spirits. God has planned and purpose that we will always be spirit, soul, and body, all full of life, new life, our bodies glorified. Indeed, we groan while we are in this tent, burdened as we are, because we do not want to be unclothed, but clothed, so that mortality may be swallowed up alive. And the one who prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave us the Spirit as the down payment. So here's the difference, as when you get saved, when you believe, as you can say, you're born again, right? God gives us the Spirit. That proof we are saved. And think about this. We are saved right now. We're not going to be saved. We are saved right now. How do we know? Notice this promise. We're given the Spirit as a down payment. The possession, the fact that the Spirit possesses us, indwells us, that's a guarantee that we are saved. Verse 6, so we are always confident knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Verse 8, and we are confident and satisfied to be out of the body and at home with the Lord. Now, why do I say that? So when we go back here, this is what we're seeing right here. Suddenly Moses and Elijah appears to them talking with him. Moses and Elijah appears. What is appear? Their inner man, because they don't have these bodies yet. At this time, Jesus had not yet died. No one actually has their glorified body. Jesus is the first to be resurrected. He is the first fruits. And then it says, they at his coming in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So what we're looking at is Moses. And think about this. They look the same. So you look the same as your body. Probably your inner man looks better. Right? And your glorified body will look even better. So the idea is that, again, so we can answer a whole lot of questions. Well, we can get glimpses of a lot of questions is, will we know one another in heaven? Well, think about this. Peter then was able to say, hey, there's Moses and there's Elijah. How did they know that? Especially when you get free from the weakness of the flesh. But I want you to see, so when we say, what are we looking at here, since Moses' body is somewhere buried? We don't know exactly what happened to Elijah's body. He was taken up in a whirlwind, and then he disappeared in the sky. He disappeared. But we know he did not. We know that he did not go to heaven because flesh and blood cannot enter the kingdom of God. So we know that. So in other words, what are we looking at? Their inner man. Now let me show you another example. Let's go to 1 Samuel. I kind of mentioned this before, but let me show you this. 1 Samuel 28. Okay. All right. To kind of give you a setup here. Saul, the first king, had sinned against God twice, and God rejected him. And at this time, things are bad for Saul. Okay. But I want you to read this, and I'm going to skip down. And I want you to look at verse 3 says, by this time, Samuel had died, and all of Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his city. So keep that in mind. He's dead and he's buried. Okay. Now, things get bad for Saul. God is not talking with them. And so I'm going to pick this up here at verse 8. Saul is in such despair. Okay. He is in such despair. So it says in verse 8, so Saul disguised himself by putting on different clothes and set out with two of his men. They came to the woman at night, and Saul said, consult a spirit for me. Bring up for me the one I tell you. But the woman said to him, you surely know what Saul has done. He has killed the mediums and the spiritists in the land. So why are you setting a trap for me to get killed? Then Saul swore to her by the Lord, as surely as the Lord lives, nothing bad will happen to you because of this. She said, "Who is it that you want me to bring up for you?" The woman asked. Bring Samuel up for me," he answered. And when the woman saw Samuel, she screamed and, and she asked Saul, "Why did you deceive me? You are Saul." Now it's kind of interesting, this whole story right here, that notice the spirit, the, the medium, she was ready to do her whole seance and no and all that kind of stuff. But then so Samuel actually shows up. Okay. So verse 13 says, "But the king said to her, 'Don't be afraid. What do you see?' He said, 'I see a spirit form,'" right? "I see a spirit form coming out of the earth," the woman answered. Then Saul asked her, "What does he look like?" "An old man is coming up," she replied, "wearing a robe." Then Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. Now, some people would try to misinterpret this and say, well, this was a familiar spirit coming up, and they have a hard time sort of understanding, why is this happening? The bit that I can tell you is that it's happening because in God's sovereignty, he's given a message to Saul. In other words, God sometimes do things despite, in other words, to fulfill his sovereignty. So there's nothing here to suggest that this is a familiar spirit, because you're going to notice even the message that he gives. So if it's a familiar spirit, wouldn't he speak kind words to Saul? But anyway, so look at what he says right here, verse 15. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Samuel asked Saul. "I'm in serious trouble," replied Saul. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He doesn't answer me anymore through either the prophets or dreams. So I called on you to tell me what I should do." Samuel answered, "Since the Lord has turned away from you and has become your enemy, why are you asking me?" So this doesn't sound like a familiar spirit. When he go, "Everything will be all right. Everything will be all right." Anyway, verse 17, "The Lord has done exactly what he said through me. The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. You did not obey the Lord and did not carry out his burning anger against the Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will also hand Israel over to the Philistines along with you tomorrow. You and your sons will be with me, and the Lord's hand. Okay, and the Lord will hand Israel over to the Philistine." And immediately Saul fell to the ground. He was terrified by Samuel's words, and he was also weak. Now, again, you see Samuel, and what is it that we're seeing? Because we already know that Samuel is dead and buried. We already know this. He's dead and he's buried. So what is she seeing? She says a spirit form. Now, again, this whole episode, it basically shows, in a sense, God's sovereignty. In other words, it just simply shows God's sovereignty. And despite what Israel, I mean, what Saul might have meant, God would, and he got the same message when Samuel was alive. Okay, but I want you to see that there is existence after death, that there is no loss of memory, consciousness, that from what we see here, things are good. I want to share one more. I know I'm over time here, but I want to share one more, and this is found in Luke. And I want you to see the kind of descriptions. Again, we get these glimpses. Keep in mind that these are just simply glimpses. Now, here is a story that Jesus tells. This is in Luke chapter 16. Now, some people debate if this is a parable or a true story. I believe it is a true story. But even if it's a parable, understand parables communicate truth. In other words, the truth. But watch this. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, feasting lavishly every day. But a poor man named Lazarus, one of the reasons why I think this is not a parable, because parables typically do not name people. But a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, was left at his gate. He longed to be filled with what fell from the rich man's table, but instead the dogs would come and lick his sores. One day the poor man died and was. Now think about that. He died and, in other words, no stop, no stop, no soul sleep, no. He died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. Now get this, the rich man also died and was buried. So we see the conclusion of this earthly journey for them. The rich man died and was buried. Now get this, and being in torments in Hades, he looked up and saw Abraham a long ways off. Now this is the second time we see how Abraham had been dead now for over 1,500 years. So how would this man know that that's Abraham? It seems that when we shed this body, that we're not just kind of limited here. But anyway, he saw Abraham a long ways off with Lazarus at his side. Father Abraham, he called out, have mercy on me, have Lazarus dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this flame. Son, Abraham said, remember that during your lifetime he received good things, just as Lazarus received bad things, but now he is comforted here while you are in agony. And besides all this, a great chasm has been fixed between us and you, so that those who want to pass over from here cannot, neither can those cross over to us. Father, he said, and then I beg you, send him to my father's house. I'm going to stop right here. I want you to see, the point I want you to see here is, notice things go on. What are we looking at here? We know that both died. He said both died. The rich man died and was buried, but we see, and again, the afterlife, as we may call it, after death, actually, it's not really actual life, it's really after death. We see that there's no loss of consciousness, there is no loss of cognitive, and not only that, it seems to be increased because he was able to recognize a man he's never met that has been dead for over 1,500 years, closer to 2,000 years. If you think about, closer to 2,000 years. And yet you see this conversation. You see this engagement. You see Abraham, you see Lazarus, they're chilling, right? He's torment. Okay? He's in torment. But notice they are existing. They are consciousness, cognitive. There is a conversation going on. So that's what I kind of wanted to kind of focus on, to kind of look at this when we see this here, that Moses and Elijah appeared to them talking with Jesus. They showed up. Same scenario. And we see kind of these three examples of existence after death. Okay? Existence after death. Like I said, this is sort of a bonus here, because as I was thinking about this, I think it was, since we don't get a chance, we don't have those many examples of the kind of life after death. You do see it in the book of Revelation, where we get a glimpse of the souls under the altars, their prayers, their thoughts, like God, vengeance, okay? But we see this, that we kind of have an expectation that, and really it should kind of really remove the fear of death. That, hey, it's all good. It's great. I mean, right now, in this life, if you are a believer, this is the worst it gets. It's all good. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective, and the Bible Plain and Simple. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in the next study.